Okay, now is the time to get out the crystal ball and tell us, what you see in the real estate market on through the rest of 2023.
Sure, and for the most part, we probably touched on this through the program today. But let's just run through these quickly because the viewers can certainly see them for themselves. But rental demand, I believe, will remain strong. Residential demand, and it's just based on the lack of affordable inventory to be purchased, as we've just talked about, and the high interest rates. Interest rates we feel are going to normalize towards the end of the year or the first quarter of 2024. Now, here's some perspective. Since 40 years, we talked about that. 7.38% is the annualized average for the last 40 years. And then if we look at 20 years, it's 4.53, which is less than the current rates, which are in the sixes. But in the context of what the consumer has to do, they are accepting this now. We saw a very slow November, December, and January because interest rates went up so rapidly and the inventory was thin, and we have a real winter. But it's really picked up in February and in March right now. In regards to, and why? Well, the consumer said, this is not going to change. This is somewhat of a new normal. And they know that if the rates do go down 1% or more, they can go to their friendly lender, our sponsors, and say, let's refinance this home. So I wanted to cover that. We're seeing more creative financing. So what's creative financing? The seller is probably going to get more involved with paying some of the cost of the buyer, such as interest rate buy down. So there's interest rate buy downs. That's where you pay an upfront fee and you buy down the rate for a number of years, potentially. Typically not too many years. It's pretty expensive. Paying some of the closing costs that the seller traditionally hasn't paid to take some of the burden off that buyer so they can still get into that home. So that is certainly one way to help buyers and sellers, a willing buyer and a willing seller to get to terms. We will see less residential sales. I mean, Bob's talked about the inventory. I didn't check this morning, but if it's less than 12 that aren't under contract in city limits, that's at the height of our sales post-pandemic. That's the fewest we had in January. So that's a real threat. And think about it. Anybody that bought a home or refinanced their home in the last 3 years is really having to weigh, do I walk away from this 3.5% hypothetically interest rate on my home to buy another home across town or in the county or in town? So that's really holding up a lot of that inventory that could flow into our marketplace. So less residential sales, again, we've covered that. They can read that. Prices will stabilize for the year, however, because of the supply. Even with higher interest rates and higher prices of these homes, we're seeing this really pacing now back to what close to what we had last year. There's not going to be a housing crash. I mean, Bob talked about it. I mean, we all were here through the Great Recession. We had a lot more inventory. We had even higher interest rates at the time. They were going down, but they were higher at the time than they are now. And we had quite a bit of inventory. And our inventory in the MLS, we had probably 240 days on market. Wow. And now we're about 45 days on the market. So, we just are in a position because supply demand, again, we're not going to see that crash. Plus, the lending practices are way better than they were before. We'll see the highest number of buyers coming from millennials and Gen Z, and this is statistically proven true, not just here, but across the nation. They've accumulated savings because they rented for a long time, but maybe they rented with roommates. Maybe they stayed with family. They put some capital away, saved some money for a down payment. And they're buying later than our generation and a few other generations a bit younger than us, but they're buying now. And a lot of times that's in that age group, 30s. So they are flowing back in as baby boomers are buying less because of their age. And for La Plata County, the record high prices, higher interest rates, cost of pre-K, inflation, these are all difficult things for our workforce. I mean, when a family has to pay $1,000 for childcare, for example, for one child a month, that's a pretty big impact to their household income.